At the edge of the city, where the old tram lines curled under bridges scrawled with graffiti and moss, Marion lived in a squat brick apartment. The locals claimed the building was haunted, not by ghosts but by moments. Time here seemed to double back on itself, sometimes skipping, sometimes stuttering. Marion felt it in her bones. The world was not as seamless as it pretended to be. It began on an ordinary Thursday, as most anomalies do. Marion was returning from the university, her mind steeped in research on theoretical physics and the nature of parallel worlds. She was unlocking the door when she noticed the handle was warm, as if someone had just left. Inside, the apartment was precisely as she'd left it, except for the photograph on the entryway table. It was a picture of her, only the colors were inverted. Skin midnight blue, hair a pale, electric orange. Behind her, the skyline was unfamiliar, geometric towers rising against a violet sky. She blinked, half expecting the image to shift back to normal, but it didn't. Instead, a low hum threaded through the room, a kind of cosmic tinnitus, and she felt something inside her mind loosen. That night, Marion dreamed of walking down a hallway lined with dozens of doors. Each door was marked with a sigil. Some she recognized from childhood sketches, others from half-forgotten dreams. Instinctively, she knew that behind every door lay a different version of herself. She awoke with a start, and the sound of rain against the window seemed to echo the pulse she'd felt in her dream. At breakfast, the news on her phone was unfamiliar. The anchor was someone she'd never seen, speaking a language she understood but couldn't quite place. The headlines referenced the polar ascendancy and the third synthesis accord, events she'd never heard of. She blinked, refreshed the page, and the world reverted to normal, but the residue of strangeness remained. For days, Marion felt reality thin and thicken like the tide. Sometimes the color of the sky outside her window would flicker, azure, then emerald, then back. She began to keep notes, logging the glitches. A neighbor who called her Maria, as if they'd known each other for years. A delivery of groceries she'd never ordered, containing brands she'd never seen. On the fifth day, her reflection in the mirror blinked independently of her own eyes. Marion pressed her palm against the glass, and her reflection smiled, a subtle knowing curve to its lips. She started investigating, consulting old papers on quantum superposition, the many worlds interpretation, and the metaphysics of consciousness. The anomalies grew more frequent. Music on the radio skipped and warped, blending songs in languages she recognized from childhood stories told by her grandmother, a woman who in this world had never traveled beyond the city's limits. One evening, Marion ventured outside, drawn by a distant music. The city felt different. Buildings seemed taller, the air charged with a faint, ozone-scented energy. She followed the sound to the city square, where a crowd had gathered. At the center was a structure, part sculpture, part machine, pulsing with shifting colors and impossible angles. People moved around it, some dressed in familiar styles, others in garments that shifted and glimmered, as if stitched from the very fabric of probability. A voice called her name, not Marion, but Maris. She turned to see a stranger with her own eyes, her own smile. "We're converging," the stranger said. "The barrier's thinning. The festival marks the crossing. Every world with its own Marion, its own pulse." Marion felt the ground hum beneath her feet. She sensed the presence of dozens, hundreds of versions of herself, some nearby, some distant, all inhabiting their own matrices of reality. The festival was more than celebration. It was a ritual, a point of resonance. Here, the worlds sang to each other, harmonizing across the quantum noise. The glitch reached its crescendo on the festival's final night. Marion was chosen by what force she could not say to step inside the structure at the square's center. She was handed a device, a small brass cube engraved with sigils matching those from her dream. Inside, the space bent, the walls flexing like the surface of a pond. In the flickering light, Marion saw herself reflected in 1,000 facets. Each reflection blinked at a slightly different rhythm. The cube pulsed in her hand and she felt herself splitting, her consciousness branching, flowing into the parallel streams. She saw worlds where she was a mathematician, a poet, an architect of impossible bridges. She glimpsed a Marion who had never left the country, another who lived on a floating city above a technicolor sea. Some versions were nearly identical, others alien, their souls flickering in unfamiliar patterns. Yet with each split, Marion felt herself returning, knitting together the fragments, the paradox of crossing. To step through the matrix was to fracture, but also to unify. Every anomaly, every glitch, was not a wound but a seam, joining worlds that might otherwise remain untouched. When Marion stepped out of the structure, the city was quiet. The festival had ended. The square was empty, yet she felt the residue of the crossing, the hum of overlapping realities, the soft shimmer of possibility. Her apartment was slightly altered. The old clock on the wall now ran backward. A painting she'd never bought hung above her desk, her own likeness, painted in the inverted colors of that first photograph. The news, the neighbors, the street outside, all subtly changed yet still familiar. Marion understood. The glitch had not erased her world, but expanded it. She moved through reality differently now, attuned to its layers and thresholds. Marion spent her days mapping the new territories of her life. She sought out the other crossers, those whose eyes held the flicker of multiversal knowledge. Together, they learned to navigate the glitches, to move between worlds, to harness the paradox. Sometimes, Marion would sit by her window, drinking tea brewed from herbs that only grew in one of the worlds she'd briefly visited. She watched the city pulse, saw the faces of people who looked just slightly off, and wondered which version of reality she inhabited that day. In quiet moments, she reflected on the paradox. Every glitch was a gift, a new possibility, a reminder that existence was not a single thread but a tapestry woven from infinite strands. The multiverse was not chaos, but harmony and multiplicity. Years later, Marion became a guide for those experiencing their first glitch. She taught them to cherish the anomalies, to listen to the echoes of other selves. She led expeditions across the city, tracing the fault lines of reality. The city itself became a mosaic, a place where timelines braided and unbraided with every step. The tram lines no longer obeyed their old routes. Sometimes a traveler would board at one stop and disembark into a world lit by twin suns or beset by endless night. And Marion stood at the threshold, a guardian of the paradox, her soul a chorus of infinite selves. In her wake, reality flickered, and the promise of crossover remained, a universe never static, always becoming. For every glitch, every subtle shift in the familiar, was a doorway waiting to be opened. And Marion, like so many before her, learned to dance between worlds, her heart attuned to the symphony of the multiverse, her life stitched together by the beautiful persistence of possibility. No one saw the change at first. It was as gentle as dusk settling over a familiar landscape, coloring the world in shades that might have always been there. Alan noticed it only in the small things, how his wife Naomi hesitated at the door, her hand trembling just slightly as she reached for the knob, how she hummed a tune he swore he'd never heard before, soft and haunting beneath her breath. They had always lived in the same house, on the same street, among the same neighbors. Routine was the bedrock of their existence. But lately, Naomi's movements carried a new cadence. Her laughter rang a note unfamiliar. Her silences grew deeper, as if she listened for voices only she could hear. Alan tried not to dwell on it. People changed, he reminded himself. Life carved new lines on faces, rerouted old habits. Yet as he watched Naomi set the table one evening, he realized she placed the forks on the left, not the right. It was a small thing, but it struck a discordant chord. "Did you switch the silverware?" he asked. Naomi blinked, confused for a moment, then smiled. "I suppose I did. It feels natural, doesn't it?" He let it go, but the small oddities gathered quietly. Naomi cooked dishes she'd never made before. A coconut lentil soup, a savory pastry filled with spiced vegetables. "Where did you learn this?" Alan inquired. She shrugged. "I just knew." She wore colors she'd never favored, ochre and turquoise, the shades swirling in patterns that seemed to vibrate. She quoted poets Alan didn't know, referenced memories that weren't theirs. "Remember that rainy afternoon in Lisbon?" she once asked. "But we've never been to Portugal," Alan replied, uneasy. Naomi only smiled, a smile with a secret folded inside. One night, Alan awoke to Naomi standing at the window, gazing into the dark. Her silhouette merged with the city lights. The air itself felt charged, as if something in the room had shifted. He called out softly, "Naomi?" She turned, and for a moment, her eyes glittered with a strange intensity, like someone seeing him for the first time. "Sometimes I can almost hear them," she whispered, voices, distant and layered, calling across the glass. Alan shivered. It was as though Naomi existed in two places at once, straddling a boundary he could not name. He recalled stories from the news, glitches in the city's network, sudden flares in devices, artwork appearing overnight in impossible styles. People claimed to dream in languages they'd never learned. Was Naomi caught in this web? Had the world itself changed beneath their feet? Days passed. Naomi's oddities became more pronounced. She would pause in conversation, searching for the right word, as if translating from a language Alan could not hear. She wrote letters in looping script he didn't recognize, sometimes leaving them tucked inside books or taped to the refrigerator. One afternoon, Alan found her in the garden, speaking to a neighbor in flawless Mandarin. He watched in astonishment. Naomi had never studied Mandarin, never cared for language lessons. When he asked later, she laughed and said, "It came to me in a dream, or maybe it was always there, waiting." Alan began to notice changes in himself too. He remembered fragments, a chess match in Prague, a mountain hike in Nepal, neither of which he'd ever done. At times he felt transient, as though memories flickered in and out, unanchored to his life. Naomi's presence soothed him, though she too seemed adrift. Alan and Naomi spoke late into the night, trying to map the contours of their shifting world. Was it a trick of the mind? A shared delusion? Or was something fundamental breaking open in reality? Naomi confessed, "Sometimes I feel like I'm a composite stitched together from different lives. I remember a daughter I never had, a language I never spoke, a grief for a city I've never seen." Alan listened, heart aching for her and for himself. "I think the world is glitching," he said. "We're all becoming more than we were, pieces of other worlds woven into our code." Naomi nodded. "We have to learn to live with it, to harmonize the fragments, otherwise we'll fall apart." The city adapted. People celebrated the crossovers with festivals, music from a dozen cultures, food that seemed to taste of places no one had visited. Art blossomed, impossible shapes and colors, stories written in dream languages. Individuals shared memories, tracing lineage not through blood but through shared anomalies. Alan and Naomi became guides, helping others integrate their new selves. Naomi taught classes in a polyglot tongue, blending elements of Spanish, Hindi, Russian, and English. Alan organized memory circles, letting people voice the lives they remembered but hadn't lived. Yet beneath the joy, some mourned the loss of certainty. Children asked which memories were real. Lovers wondered if their devotion survived the rewriting. Naomi, sometimes, wept quietly for the home she felt but could not name. With time, Alan and Naomi found a rhythm. Their love became elastic, stretching to encompass the myriad selves they now possessed. They learned to cherish the glitches, not as flaws, but as doors to wider realities. Naomi's oddness never faded entirely, but Alan grew to embrace it, a sign of their shared passage through the multiversal storm. Together they sifted through memories, picking those that resonated, letting the others drift away. On the night of the Convergence Festival, Alan found Naomi standing at the window again. This time, she smiled and beckoned him close. "The worlds are singing," she whispered. "If we listen, maybe we'll learn how to dance between them." They stood together, watching the city pulse with the light of 1,000 realities. Outside, laughter rose in harmonies, impossible in a single world. Years later, Alan would recall the uneasy beauty of those first changes. The city, forever shifting, never settled into old patterns. Naomi, ageless and enigmatic, remained his anchor and his guide. Sometimes in the quiet hours, Alan glimpsed the old world, a place of routine, of certainty, but he knew they could never return. The glitch had bound them to possibility, to the infinite tapestry of selves, and beyond the window, the matrix flickered, another crossover, another beginning. For every anomaly, every subtle shift in the familiar, was a doorway waiting to be opened. In the end, Alan understood. The strangeness in Naomi was not a loss, but a gift, the echo of infinite worlds, the promise of becoming more than either could have imagined. say reality is but a construct, a tapestry woven together by unseen threads. Most live their lives blissfully unaware of the fraying edges, the subtle distortions, the moments when the matrix hiccups. But for some, reality splinters, revealing glimpses of worlds beyond comprehension. This is one such story, born from the glitch that binds the multiverse. Miles Calder always prided himself on his punctuality. His morning routine was a script: coffee brewing by 7:03, news scroll at 7:08, keys in hand by 7:15. But on the morning of April 9th, Miles awoke to the clock blinking 88:88, a nonsensical time, impossible, yet somehow real. He rubbed his eyes, expecting the digital display to snap back into logic, but it remained steadfast. 88:88, the numbers flickering as if caught between channels. It was the first sign. The world outside his apartment seemed unchanged, but Miles felt a subtle shift, as if he were walking through someone else's memory. The barista at the corner cafe wore a golden monocle, a detail Miles swore had never existed, and the air was thick with the scent of cinnamon, a spice that was never used before. He shrugged it off, a glitch, perhaps, in his own mind. But then came the crossing. Miles was halfway through his commute, the city humming with its usual orchestration of horns and hurried footsteps, when a ripple washed through the street. People froze, mid-step, their forms blurred, as if reality itself paused, buffering. Then in the blink of an eye the world snapped forward, but everything was subtly off-kilter. Billboards advertised quantum cola. The skyline boasted a floating spire that defied physics, and the usual stray cat that haunted Miles's route now wore a vest embroidered with hieroglyphics. At work, his monitor flickered, displaying not spreadsheets but constellations, swirling galaxies mapped in fractal patterns. Miles blinked, and the usual clutter returned, but the sense of otherness gnawed at him. He confided in his colleague Priya, a software engineer with a penchant for science fiction. "It's like the simulation glitched," Miles said, voice low. Priya smiled, her eyes gleaming behind thick glasses. "Or maybe you've slipped through a crack in the multiverse." She said it as a joke, but the words lingered. That night, as Miles lay in bed, his ceiling fractured, showing glimpses of other worlds, a city of glass towers, a desert ruled by sentient shadows, a stormy sea beneath twin moons. He tried to dismiss them as dreams, but deep down he knew the boundaries had thinned. The next morning, Miles found his apartment subtly changed. The coffee maker brewed not coffee but a luminous blue liquid that tasted of starlight and nostalgia. His newsfeed reported on the elections of the High Council of Terra Vega. In his mirror, his reflection shimmered, morphing into a dozen versions of himself. Miles the explorer, Miles the poet, Miles the rebel. Desperate for answers, Miles returned to Priya. She listened intently, then rummaged through her desk for a battered notebook covered in equations and sketches. "I've been mapping anomalies," she confessed. "Little things, a clock that runs backward, a text that writes itself. I think the Matrix is experiencing a crossover event. You're not alone." Together, they started cataloging the glitches. Each was a crack, a window into another universe. The more they documented, the more frequent the anomalies became. Elevators leading to endless libraries, strangers' voices speaking in perfect synchronicity, stray memories of places they'd never been. Priya theorized that the matrix governing their reality was misaligned, cross-referencing code from other universes. "Think of it like overlapping frequencies," she said. "Sometimes you hear a song from a distant station, sometimes the stations merge." One evening, as Miles returned home, he encountered someone at his door, a person who bore his face but wore an expression unfamiliar, eyes alight with curiosity. The doppelganger extended a hand. "I'm Miles, with a ye, from the 5th iteration. Our worlds are converging." Miles stared, speechless, as the other explained. Their universes were colliding, the matrix pulling code from each to patch its errors. "We're the same, but different. Alternate solutions to the same equation." Together, they explored the boundaries of their shared space. Miles learned that Miles was a historian, chronicling crossover events throughout the multiverse. Their worlds often brushed against each other, exchanging data, memories, even physical laws. At times, other versions appeared. Miles the painter, who saw colors beyond human comprehension. Miles the physicist, who spoke in the language of particles. Each brought fragments of their reality, and the walls between worlds grew thin. Priya, fascinated by the influx of anomalies, developed a device, a resonator, to tune into the frequencies of the Matrix. With Miles and his counterparts, she activated it, and reality warped. They found themselves at the Nexus, a cosmic intersection where infinite universes converged, woven together by luminous threads. Here, everything existed at once. Civilizations rose and fell in moments, stars blinked into being and faded, and Miles saw the true scope of the multiverse. He understood that the glitch was not an error but a connection, an invitation for worlds to share, to learn, to grow. In the Nexus, each version of Miles faced a choice: remain tethered to their original world, or embrace the chaos and possibility of the crossover. Some returned, choosing stability. Others, like Miles, lingered, awed by the beauty of endless possibility. Back in their reality, Miles and Priya began to notice subtle changes in themselves. They retained knowledge from the other worlds, a painter's eye for color, a physicist's intuition, a historian's sense of time. The Matrix had woven the crossover into their code, integrating fragments from across the multiverse. The city, too, had changed. People spoke in languages they'd never learned. Technology advanced in leaps and bounds, and art flourished in impossible styles. The glitch, once a source of confusion, became a wellspring of innovation. But with the beauty came uncertainty. Sometimes, memories overlapped, and Miles mourned lives he'd never lived. Priya worried about the structural integrity of the Matrix. Could too many crossovers cause collapse? Together, they worked to harmonize the influx, sharing their experiences with others, helping their world evolve without losing itself. They became guides, traveling the fringes of possibility, watching for new glitches, new crossovers. Years passed, and the world adapted. The Matrix, ever shifting, continued to glitch, but now the crossovers were celebrated. Festivals marked the convergence, stories shared of encounters with other selves, inventions born from the fusion of alien ideas. Miles, older and wiser, sometimes glimpsed the old world in dreams, a place of certainty, of routine, but he knew he could never return. The glitch had bound him to the multiverse, a traveler on infinite roads, and somewhere, beyond the edge of perception, the Matrix flickered, signaling another crossover, another chance to unravel and rewrite reality. For in the multiverse, every glitch is a doorway, every anomaly a beginning,